This episode is brought to you by Rad Dudes Who Love Nature.
Hi, podcast listeners. If you're like us, there are loads of environmental problems that you'd like to solve, and maybe one or two where you wonder why no one else is paying attention to them. For me, for at least a couple decades, the environmental impact of roads has been top of that list. And so I was delighted to encounter Daryl Jones' book, A Clouded Leopard in the Middle of the Road, which is all about the environmental devastation caused by roads, something that might surprise even die-hard environmentalists. The book also deals with solutions to those impacts of roads, and we're happy to invite Dr. Jones onto the podcast to talk all about it. As always, you can get in touch with us at Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast, and you can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. And don't forget to get a copy of Exploring Philly Nature, a guide for all four seasons, which includes guidance on how to cruise roads on your bike or on foot to find dead animals. On that happy note, on with the episode.
I'm Daryl Jones. I'm a professor emeritus, as they say, from Griffith University in Brisbane. But these days I find myself living in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia because my partner has got a high-level job in a university over here. So this was the perfect opportunity in the middle of COVID to finally take an earlier than expected or planned retirement so that I could become a full-time writer. So I'm now a full-time writer. I've been
You're living the
always
dream.
writing about. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. I mean, the only problem is we've got kids in Australia, elderly parents dashing back and forth during a pandemic hasn't been much fun. But when you outside there are monkeys and exotic things like hornbills and chipmunks and squirrels and stuff that I don't get in Australia at all. So I'm still enjoying it a lot.
Talk about, really quick, this is a little bit of a diversion, but chipmunks?
No, I didn't. I shouldn't have said chipmunks. No chipmunks. No, I was thinking of. I describe them as chipmunks to people who don't know what they are. Okay. They're actually called tree shrews, and they're very clever at getting into our house. They get into our house and steal our bananas. So that's, for other people that's just they're like vermin. To me, they're so exotic. They look fantastic. Big bushy tails. Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll have to look them up later. What I'll start off with for our listeners is an explanation as to why I got so excited when I saw Dr. Jones's book, A Clouded Leopard in the Middle of the Road, which is that I think people who listen to the podcast know that my gateway into loving nature and cities and loving nature in general is my love of reptiles and amphibians. One of the common ways of looking for them is basically driving around roads at night or other times of day when you might expect them to be active, and trying to find often snakes, but lots of times frogs and other things crossing roads, and you're sort of driving a big transect through habitat is one way to think of it. And in the process, you get really used to seeing dead things, and you get used to seeing the dead animals that you're looking for, and that's a mixed feeling when you see like a dead king snake on the road in New Jersey or something, and that's what you wanted to find alive. But then you know that they're there. It's sort of evidence of occurrence, even if it's a depressing form of evidence. And then you get used to looking at all the things that aren't what you're looking for that are dead on the road. And looking at, that's a mammal or that's a bird. Looks like a hawk. It looks like an owl. And you sort of it's such that now I can't drive anywhere without one eye on the shoulder of the road, they're trying to ID what I see dead. And so, I don't know, it must have been like 20 years ago when I was in grad school. I was noticing then, because you're in grad school, you have time to read literature, noticing the literature about how roads affect, particularly the fauna that lives around roads. And it seemed something that, to me, was like really obvious because I'd sort of been trained in a way to pay attention to roads. But I think it's stuff that on this part of my brain is also surprised by the facts when you hear about them. I think is in the introduction of your book. You've got a line in there that roads are among the most monumental of all human constructions, yet they are effectively invisible. And it was a great way to sum it up in the sense that I think so many of us think of them as just lines on a map. and forget that the physical reality of them as structures. So I maybe we'll start there. Like, talk a little bit about as a conservation field, how is this like woken up? How has it been something that people have realized is actually a big deal?
Well, it hasn't across the board. You're right. I mean, most people don't even think about roads. They're just They're just a means for us to go from A to B. To get up in the morning and drive to work or school or university, whatever you're doing. They're just simply something that's there. We never even think about them, but we have imposed them on the landscape around us. And it's not just animals, but it's humans and water and everything that flows naturally is now interrupted by this extraordinarily dense and increasingly large network of roads that go everywhere. And that's something that I guess that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with this book is draw attention to that and in the extraordinary impact that that's having. In modern places like Australia and the States and just about everywhere, the density of the network of roads, the spaces in between that aren't covered with roads is now so tiny. In the United States, you can't go anywhere that's 7 kilometres away from a road, and that's in the most remote places anywhere. And in Europe, in Netherlands, it's like 100 metres. There's just nowhere left that's hardly anywhere that's not affected by roads. So that's imposed on the landscape. And then if you think across that landscape, it's absolutely critical that things can move. Water can move, animals can move, birds can move, reptiles can move, frogs can move, and yet in every direction they're going to be confronted by a road. So the road will be both a physical barrier, just something that they have to get over without getting killed if that's possible, or a really risky place because of the traffic. So just the simple movement of just about every type of organism is hugely affected by roads. And the roadkill that you see and that you mentioned earlier that's just the visible bit. That's just the stuff that we see. And in fact, what's extraordinary is that the majority of animals that get killed on the road are never seen. They get killed at night and then cleaned up in the morning by hawks or crows or any other animal that cleans them up. So we don't see them. Lots of animals get injured and then die somewhere else away from the road. So I'm trying to get across this thing. This huge structure, global network, is having an enormous effect, and we haven't even, we need to wake up to that, and that's what's slowly happening.
Tony, this is something I think I'll throw at you that I think a lot of us will be like, well, yeah, but birds can fly. Like, surely roads aren't at all a problem for them. But I know this is something that you and I have talked about. So, just share maybe a little bit about that. Like, how is it that even birds could be challenged by roads?
So birds are adapted to specific conditions, right? Like everything is. And yes, birds are, I guess, perhaps the most modal of any taxonomic group on the planet. But some birds only really fly to escape a predator. They don't really fly to birds aren't migratory, especially through the tropics. Birds often only fly to avoid a predator or to they don't move very far at all. So the classic example is how rivers basically make the Amazon effectively islands, and there's different species between different rivers. But roads have the same effect, right? Like a gnat eater or ant hitter, they don't want to fly in the open at all. So you put a road through their habitat, they are not going to cross it. They're going to get picked off by a forest falcon or a tropical accipiter. They do not want to cross. They've never ever been in the open. Their entire life has been in dense understory, right? In shady, dense forest. So roads, create an edge effect. Birds that are edge species that might be nest predators, such as blue jays, or nest parasites like brown-headed cowbirds, will it brings them into forests that they normally wouldn't have been in. So roads have an incredible effect on birds in many ways.
That's a really good point. In fact, that's what got me going. As I'm an ornithologist, and I didn't even think about this. I was forced to sort of start taking notice of, stuff like reptiles and mammals because they were being killed on the road. I was mostly birds. And so I don't need to worry about birds because they'll just fly over the road. Well, it didn't take me long before on my very first big project where a huge big overpass was put over a 4-lane road, I remember thinking, well, the mammals are starting to come on here. And then I was seeing we've got these little birds called fairy wrens. They're about that big. They're tiny, tiny
and
little
so
birds.
Since this is audio, how big you're showing with your fingers something that looks to me like a couple inches.
let's say 3 inches, 3 inches from top to bottom, a small bird, absolutely. And I saw
a lot of that's tail.
And that's right. That's right. That's right. Well, I saw these little birds and I thought, oh, here they are. Here's some birds that are going to cross the road. They were hopping their way through the understory on one side of this busy road section. And I thought, wait a minute, those birds are never going to fly across that. It was like 90 metres of space between this forest and the forest on the other side. And so this study was about the growing vegetation that had been planted on the top of this overpass for wildlife. And I'm a bird guy, and I hadn't even thought that the birds would be using it and how important that was. And just like Tony said, there is a huge number of smaller birds that are used to living only in the understory areas. To them, the space of the road is nothing to do with the traffic or the noise or the light or anything. It's just the sheer space. There's no way in the world those little birds are ever going to cross anything like that. And there's been lots of studies done in all sorts of places, but it was firstly done in the Amazon, which showed there's a huge suite of those smaller passerines which would never cross anything more than 45 metres. And that's like 2 lanes.
I refer to the sloth study in near Manaus, right? The single large or several small.
Yeah, that was part of it. Absolutely, yeah. And it just showed, and then suddenly you realise, because this whole exercise for me has been, wait a minute, I've never even thought about that. And then you start to realise that everywhere in forest country where there is a road, that's more or less a brick wall. Those birds will never cross that space, never. And they are now isolated in the patches on either side. And for any of those patches that have got big roads either side of them, those birds will never move and will never be able to be replaced if they disappear. So that's just part of the reason why this is such a big topic and a really important global topic to take up, because we've got to do something about this. This is the isolation and fragmentation that's happening on a global scale is monumental and a major part of the decline and the level of extinction that's going on.
And your guys we're sort of touching on something, but I want to make it a little more explicit. Can you talk a little bit about when we fragment landscapes? And Tony, you were just alluding to an important study about how the scale of fragmentation matters and what can survive. Just talk a little bit about like what we might think of as a sort of called island biogeography and road effects. Like how do those topics come together?
Yeah, they do. It's all to do with the level of the landscape. Ecologists tend to think of just small spaces where their species lives along the river or on that mountain or whatever it might be. But when you start to think about the needs and the movement requirements for lots of different species, migratory species, or just big species that need lots of space like mountain lions or deer or whatever it might be, the ones that have to move through space, through large areas, for various reasons, for various ecological and behavioural reasons, they're the ones that are going to be confronted by the roads everywhere. And so, if in a place, and it's usually the density of roads is higher next to the cities, obviously, because the further you go away from the cities, you have more rural landscape or wildland landscape or whatever it might be that doesn't have so many roads. So there's an effect there. But the smaller the space that is now isolating populations, it depends on what the populations are of, what the taxa are. But every time that there is a smaller and smaller space that's more and more isolated from the next space that's available, means that extinction probability is so much higher in those areas. You're just going to have a wildfire or a disease or a type of predator that turns up or something happen, and the probability of extinction goes up, and the probability of replacement goes down because there's nowhere for the animals to come and replenish what's just been lost. So these things collide, and I mean that's probably a good used word to use with this. They collide together with a huge impact on biodiversity in general.
Yeah, and I'll cite just my own practical, selfish or self-oriented experiences with the snakes in a city like Philadelphia. In much of Philadelphia, the one kind of snake that you find is something called a brown snake, which our Australian guest will think of a much larger snake in Australia. But here, brown snakes, what we're talking about are little worm and slug-eating snakes that top out at about the length of a pencil. And they there's probably a bunch of reasons why they do well in cities, but one of them is they just don't need a lot of space. I mean, you could probably have a decent sized population living in the interior of one city block if it's got enough vegetation, backyards in the middle of it. Whereas something like a black rat snake, which is one of my favorite snakes, which is a big constrictor, gets to be 6+ feet, maybe up to close to 2 meters. This is a snake that covers a lot of ground, and we only find them in Philadelphia in sort of the fringes of the city along the rivers, where from the snake perspective, you've got these long ribbons of green probably along the river that gives them some place to go. But they're the kind of snake you find run over on the road in the countryside. And there's just no way that a snake could make it to reproductive age without getting run over by cars. Yeah. Their defensive mechanism is to freeze up.
Okay.
So it's funny we're talking about this because just last week I was in Medford, New Jersey, which is a really cool area. It's basically like the closest. The Pine Barrens is a beloved place for Billy and I. It's pine forest in the interior of New Jersey, and so the suburbs of Philadelphia on the eastern side basically stop at the Pine Barrens because they're protected because of this aquifer that they really want to protect. And my friend moved there, and he's actually, I got some traction on my book, and I was visiting my friend who is a graphic designer who's helping me refine my proposal because a publisher wants me to refine the proposal for my book. So we'll talk about that in another podcast. But I was visiting him, and he lives in Medford, New Jersey, in this really cool community. And the housing, HOA, that was the housing authority. Or what do you call it? What's the HOA stand for again?
Homeowners Association.
Homeowners Association.
Which can be these, if you're used to cities, homeowners associations in subdivisions where the local government didn't feel like taking on more local government functions. They end up being these private associations that take on quasi-governmental functions, like telling you what you can do in front of your house in terms of lawn or garden. And it can be, for someone who's from a city, that can be weird.
Anyway, this place is actually kind of cool because it's an HOA that stipulates native plants, and it's beautiful. And I was walking around with my buddy, and there's lakes and forests and trails, and I was like, oh, this is the Medford, New Jersey is historically known as the closest population of timber rattlesnakes to Philadelphia. And I said, and he's like, oh, really? They'll be here? And I was like, and without even thinking, I was just like, not this many roads.
Oh, right.
It just rolled off my tongue.
You're right.
And
there you go.
It's because the home range of that species, if there's too many roads in it, they're going to get become pancakes on the road. It's just not going to be there, and it's so sad. But there's just road density of roads in an area. If there's too many roads and a certain amount of acreage or hectareage, I guess, to everybody else in the world, it's going to mean that a large a meter and a half snake that's very thick, one of the thickest snakes in our area.
They're slow. Very deliberate creatures.
It's just not going to. They can't persist where there's too high density of roads because they're going to get run over.
And then one other quick, just a callback to a previous episode we did recently where we interviewed a white-tailed deer. We were talking about white-tailed deer with a guy named Bernd Blasi from Cornell University, and they've done studies collaring deers, putting transmitters on them, and we were talking about and white-tailed deer in eastern North America are doing great. But we were mentioning he's mentioning that they're in a way their primary predator is motor vehicles, and we're used to seeing dead deer along the road. But his point was that actually there's as Daryl just pointed out, there's a much greater fraction when you're tracking them that you realize get hit by a car, stagger into the woods, and then take 2 days to die under in a thicket. And it's so, and I'm conscious of partly of time and also just that your book isn't just about all the things that are terrible about roads. And I'd say half of it is about solutions. And so let's try to shift there. I mean, I think I'm jealous reading your book about all the places you've gone to look at roads and look at crossings and other kinds of things. So I guess maybe introduce a couple of your favorite. We'll start there, like a few of your favorite solutions for how to mitigate the problems of roads through habitat.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's the point. I could have written a really, really depressing book that just was all about how terrible roads are.
I'd say half of it is.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. But the point of it, this was really something important. We probably had enough of doom and gloom stuff. There is some really, really good things going on, and they need to be highlighted as well. As just we can say, isn't it great to feel so miserable all the time? Or we can actually say there are some really genuine, huge things going on that are positive in this space. And so, so I've established. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of just how big an impact these things were, and I think I do that pretty well. And if you sort of got through the halfway through the book and thought, "Shit, what are we going to do now?" There is good news. So it doesn't take much. It takes a bit of will because you have to work out. How can we get animals safely across this place, this flat surface that lots of animals want to avoid? And if they try to move across it, they'll just get flattened. So what else can we do? Well, there's a whole bunch of things, but they start with under the road, and every road in the world has got tunnels and culverts and pipes to deal with the water that always crosses. And there's water engineering stuff to do with roads is enormous. I mean, it's one of the most important things. If you get the water management stuff wrong, you'll have an undermined road that will collapse if you don't get the water flowing properly. So there's tunnels, and they've been used by the local animals ever since they first went in. There's no doubt about that. They've just been going through them. But a lot of animals, especially mammals, don't like getting their feet wet. So, and a lot of those tunnels and pipes and things do have water. They're either damp or full of water all the time. So they're not much good. So what has been happening is there's been special pipes put in or special culverts put in or whatever, or ledges that go underneath along the sides of the culvert that allow animals to get across the road under the road safely.
I mean, there are some of them that have like logs, like sort of suspended through the culvert for creatures that like.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And so there's been a lot of work done on what does your favourite thing require to get through the place. So I'll just talk about some reptiles because I know you might be vaguely interested in that. There's a place where there's it's a big square culvert, so it's just a standard box culvert, but it's got 3 ledges. The top ledge, so it comes down like looking at it through, it's just a big square going underneath the road. There's a ledge at the top, and then a step, and then a step, and then a step. And then the 4th step, the lowest step, is where the water can flow. But the next step up is the widest one, and that's just concrete with some sand on it, and that's where the mammals can walk across. So the deer and or in our case, kangaroos or possums or whatever, they can cross it as well. But the top level is dry sand with rocks. And it's specifically designed for reptiles to move and hide, and little places where they can, set aside and go into a hollow log or whatever, and allows them to slowly work their way across under the road. So there's a whole science now of what surfaces will animals of different sorts use when we put them on, because it's always concrete, but a lot of animals don't like moving along dry, cold concrete. It's pretty horrible for them. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on about what can be done there. So the underpass work that's pretty straightforward. There's always been tunnels under roads. It starts to get really interesting when we talk about over the roads, because to put a structure completely over the top of the road is a big undertaking. It's an engineering undertaking. It costs a lot of money. There has to be really strong reasons for it to be there. And initially, it was, there was a lot of skepticism, and I was what would have been one of the people that said, "Sure, this is going to work. Why would any animals go?"
In particular, sorry for interrupting, but I was thinking about this when I was reading your book about these structures for dormice, which are not large animals, and you're looking at these contraptions that are these cable bridges with weird triangular cross section, tube. I don't know what to call them, like over roads in Europe. Talk a little bit about those. That's as a counterintuitive crossing device,
Yeah, so that's a different sort. So the one I'll get back to is the standard, like a bridge that you drive.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You drive through. But these other ones, they're called canopy bridges, and there's a whole series of all sorts of animals which they only live in the canopy of the trees. If they possibly can, they will never come to the ground because the predators are down there. They're not used to it. And living here in the jungle. I mean, I'm very aware.
Well, now that you see those tree shrews,
that's right. Yeah, so I mean, there are, just not far from here, there are rainforest, which is where the trees are 50 meters high, and the monkeys and things that live there do not want to come down to the ground to get across. And there you see it all the time. There's a road going right through the middle, and so the monkeys have to come to the surface. They look down. They've got to climb down 50 meters, cross the road. If they survive that, climb back up. So. All that sort of stuff. So there's a whole array of things, including this dormouse bridge. This one blew me away because of the level of experimentation that went into it, and it works. It works really well. But they've found out a way. It's modular, so you buy sections that are in triangles, and you fit them all together as wide as you need to get across your road. And the triangle, the base of the triangle is where the animals walk. And so it's got little places where the animals can hide. If there's a predator, they can go into a little place and hang out for a little bit. There's cameras everywhere showing exactly what's moving back and forth. And there's a surface. It's kind of like a rough pretend grass surface on the bottom layer. And so they put it through, and I was involved in. I was lucky enough to visit the experimental site, which was in the Isle of Wight, just off the in the English Channel. And that was fascinating, seeing all the things that are going on there. Although they designed it for the dormouse. Now a dormouse it's probably chipmunk size. I'll use that term now.
Yeah.
So that it's a chipmunk-sized rodent, gorgeous little thing. It's called the hazel dormouse in Great Britain. And there's a rare, closely related species in Europe which works as well, called the edible dormouse. Now, think why it might be called the edible dormouse.
Because the Romans loved to eat them, yeah.
That's exactly right. You can actually get a skewer with a dozen of them on roasted over the fire. But no, this thing worked. I mean, it's so. My first impression, and it's the impression that just about everybody has, is you think, look at this gigantic this structure that's made entirely of human stuff, metal and bits of stuff. Why would animal use this? Why would they do it? But they do. They use it all the time. If it's appropriately designed, they use them. And that's probably the first thing to say is that 99% of the structures that have been put in for animals get used from day one. Animals are waiting for the opportunity. They know they can't safely cross a road somewhere. Give them a chance to do something that they've never done before, and they will use it. And so these things work, and they work really well.
That's awesome. And I'll chime in for some lower tech things that I just for folks who might be listening locally. There are a few examples I know of places where, particularly when it's amphibian breeding seasons, and when certain there are lots of species of amphibians, at least in our temperate areas, where they'll breed en masse in a short period of time. So you got a few weeks. There's going to be a ton of them on the roads. So I know through some state parks, and also even in a neighborhood in Philadelphia, Roxborough, there's a place where they shut the road down for. And these aren't major highways; these are small roads. But still, that's a that to me, it's a very heartening low tech solution. Yeah. While we're waiting for them to build the proper towed underpass. But it's another class of solutions that I think are worth mentioning.
That's right. And I mean, there are lots of places, especially in Europe, where those traditional annual events have led to the local community all getting out at night on the rainy nights with buckets and things and loading up lots of toads, or in this case, the one thing I'm thinking about, salamanders, piling them in with gloves into buckets, walking them across, dumping them on the other side of the road. But nearly in all of those places now, which were well known and for hundreds of years and caused billions of animals to die, those now, almost all of them have got their own special under the road amphibian underpass. So but they do that. Europe, it's just a different matter over there. I mean, the Europe is where all the action has been, and where everybody in the world is catching up with Europe. But Europe, you've got to remember, has been through some pretty catastrophic times, and so they face the reality that there's almost nothing left that's natural. It's been devastated by world wars and intensive agriculture for centuries. So anything that's left that's even vaguely half nice is indescribably important, and so they'll do anything they possibly can to save it. So the motivation is very strong to build these things. I think in both of our countries, we get lulled into a kind of complacency by how much open space there seems to be in other parts of the country. Yeah. It's always that, it'll be fine. We might be killing lots of animals here, but somewhere down the track, they'll be fine. Right. Yeah. You can't have that illusion in Denmark, absolutely. You know exactly what's going on. I might just return to something that you first started with, and that was, there is the general idea that when you see roadkill, it's like a sampling of the abundance of the wildlife that's around. Good point. So lots of people just say, that's fine. If you see lots of dead things on the road, great. That's because there are lots of things that are there. Now that is the case in a lot of cases. That is the case, but only if there's not a reason for if the animals are. The reason that the animals are going to the road is simply to cross it. But that's not the case in lots of situations. They're going to the road because it might be attractive for reasons such as other animals that you want to eat are already dead there. You might be attracted to the roadkill that's there. It might be you're a reptile and you want to. It's a nice hard, a warm surface to warm up a bit, and so you might just hang out there in the middle of the day, which may be not a good idea. But so there are lots of reasons like that, and it turns out that there are lots of examples now where the impact of the collisions with vehicles has led to local extinction of animals. Yeah, because so it's not just this. Don't worry about it. There's plenty of them there type thing. Oh no, a classic example I think of is it happens a lot of places in the world, but where you have female aquatic turtles looking to nest. Yeah, and if you have a road along a wet area, the classic situations they'll cross the road trying to look for somewhere to dig a nest, and you don't have to kill that many for long-lived, relatively slowly reproducing creature. You don't have to kill that many reproductive females to cause the population to start to tank. Absolutely, and just simple basic stuff like if the animals are slow, the probability of getting hit on the road is just so much higher. Yeah. So one more time, I think we'll start wrapping this. We'll wrap this up. I think we're going to do a part 2 with Daryl Jones, talking about a different topic because he's honestly got like 5 topics we could talk about. We're going to limit ourselves to 2. And so first, I want to thank you for coming on. And one more time, what's the name of the book? The name of the book, and this is worthwhile thinking about. Why did I call it this? A Clouded Leopard in the Middle of the Road, Cornell University. Yep, and I'll say we'll leave that as a teaser. There's a great anecdote which gets to the title, and for one of the most, to my mind, special animals you could encounter anywhere.